going to do John 2, verses 13 to 22. So, and the title of my sermon is Good Anger. Good Anger. So, I had a pastor tell me one time that instead of the show The Office, which many of you remember, was one of my favorite shows with Steve Carell, instead of doing that, they should do a show called The Church. Because crazy things go on in church. Make you angry with some of the things that go on in church. Some of them are funny, some of them are not so funny, which will actually make you extremely angry. So in the church, there's things that I have seen and I've had pastors tell me about. I know that one pastor, every time he preached, there was a man that did not like him, and he made it apparent that he did not like him, and every single time that he preached, as soon as he started his sermon, he would get up and walk out of the room. And then after he finished the sermon, he would make it apparent to come back in and to sit back down, because he didn't want to hear his sermon. I also knew another pastor that told me that every time something was said, there was a person in his congregation that person may not have liked what that person said in his congregation in one particular sermon. The person started shaking their keys every time to distract the pastor and distract the congregants, because he wasn't happy with what the pastor was preaching on. You will see all kinds of things. People even have it for their own agenda. They come in there and they make their own agenda. Even they try to capitalize. I had one woman, my very first church, she was up there selling, I think they were called frenzies or something like that. They were actually candles, and they had fragrances. And she was 2 for 1, in the beginning of church, when she was doing right after the announcements, which were really part of the announcements. All kinds of crazy things happen in churches that make you want to just flip the table, throw your arms up, and say, what am I even doing in a church? So one of the worst things that I've had happen in the church was I had in 2 separate occasions, and luckily one, the person wasn't there when somebody told me about it, and the other one I had already left the church and gone to another church, is 2 separate people were trying to sell narcotics to people. Now, one particular case, the person had a disability, and the other particular case, the person had a severe illness. But still, they were trying to make and sell narcotics in the church. So all things go on in the church absolutely crazy. And again, people make their own personal profit. They do their own personal agendas, and they don't come to worship the Lord. They have something that's hidden behind. And just like Jesus comes into this picture in this text, they are trying to make a profit. They are on outside of the temple. They are changing the coins to the currency, because there's hundreds of thousands of people coming in for Passover. And what they're doing is they're changing the coins over to the Roman currency for the pilgrims. This is the Father's house. This is God's house. And they're doing this so they can make and trade. They were also selling animal sacrifices of sheep, cattle, and doves, amongst other things. It was a big trading place. Jesus gets upset. Now, to give you a little context behind this, in John's Gospel, this is the 2nd chapter, it's the very beginning. This is the straw that starts to break Jesus' back. The Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. This is the straw that breaks Jesus' back, where they have to kill Jesus. The Jewish people say, he's gotten too powerful, he's flipping tables over in the temple, we are going to kill him. In John's Gospel, again, it's different. It's the straw that starts breaking his back. And the disciples start to notice, and I'll get to that, they know that this is going to cause a major problem. Jesus in John takes a whip. The other gospels don't have where he takes a whip, starts smashing the coins go everywhere, he starts flipping the table, and he is angry. Like I said, most of the time, when you talk about anger, it's usually a bad thing. But sometimes anger is good. He causes change in that house and lets them know, not in my Father's house, as I paraphrase that. But he says this is not a marketplace. And Jesus is very upset about this. Very angry. Who wouldn't be? And here we have him going, and now they're upset. They want to see, he said, where the problem is, where the blasphemous comes in, is he says, my Father's house. And when they hear that, Father's house, those two words, they want to see a sign for him. They ask him to perform a miracle. If you're going to say that you're the Son of God, we want to see a miracle. And they're putting him on the spot. This is Jesus' second major appearance. This is really his first major appearance, because he was at a private wedding, and the first sign, which means miracle in John's gospel, he changed water into wine. This is his first major appearance in front of everyone. Again, thousands of people were coming for Passover, and they want to see a sign. I'm going to stop there for 1 second. He flips the table over. There's going to be some trouble here. They want to see a sign. They see him blasphemous. But I want to tell you, sometimes we just want to flip a table over, throw up our hands and say, I'm done with this. Sometimes in church we may still say, throw up our hands, flip the table over, throw up our hands, I'm done. I don't even want to come back to this church. I don't even stay in this ministry or work with these people. It happens. It happens quite frequently. But we can't flip over the table, throw up our hands, and say we're done until God tells us that we're done. So here's the thing, is we have where we flip the tables over, throw up our hands like we really don't care. Is God has a plan for us. God has lots of plans for us. So we can't just flip it over on our own will. But there is good anger and bad anger. And most of the time when you talk about bad anger, it is resentment. It sticks on you, and it will sit on you for years. You will have bitterness, resentment, vengeance, and that will make you a bitter and sometimes, most of the time, a very nasty person. And not fun to be around. Anger, you can't really let it fester on you. But there's also good anger. There's good anger, and good anger, one of the good things of anger, is it can be energizing, is that it causes change. Some of the systems, they were capitalizing a systematic capitalization on the church, on the temple. And that is what they were capitalizing off of. They had livestock and they were changing the currency so they could trade. There are systems that we have in place that make you want to flip the table and throw up your hands. Systems like some of the government systems that we have. And just upset of how they go, and you want to flip the table over. The immigration system. Most of you see that in the news today, that Republicans and Democrats can't come together and make a plan for the border. We want to flip the table up, throw our hands in the air, say, this is ridiculous, I'm done with this. Some things like public school systems. Some public schools get more money than others. I just saw an article today of what schools were getting more than others. Makes you want to flip a table. The medical, healthcare system, big pharma makes you want to flip a table and throw up your hands. Doctors' visits are so expensive, then you got to deal with your healthcare insurance. If you even have one, of 27 million people do not have health insurance. They won't take this procedure because your insurance doesn't cover it. Your doctor has to put it through in order for you to get through that. And you put it through your insurance, and it's going to take a more delay. It's so frustrating. It's so angry. This doctor you can't go to because they don't take your insurance. It makes you want to flip the table and throw your hands up in the air. But these are the things that we need change. And a lot of the things, and the social economic system is another one, that we need changed. The disparity of wages. Now, these are some of the things that we need change, and it's good to have good anger for. So, that is one of the things. Change good anger. Where you flip the table up, you don't throw your hands up in the air, and you gotta self-control yourself, and make it good anger and make these changes. Again, most of these systems need to be freshly made, because the systems were made that way. They're not broken. They were made that way, so they have to be made afresh. So change is good. A lot of these systems need to be made afresh because they were made that way. They're not broken. They were made to hold people down. Systematic racism meant to hold people down. Another system makes you want to throw the table over. We need change. So now I want to talk about how we get back in this text. We get back in this text, they want him to make a sign. And he tells them this. You tear down this temple, I will rebuild it in 3 days. Now keep in mind, this is the second temple that was built. The first temple was destroyed in 586 from Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. 70 years later, in 516, it was starting to be rebuilt. In this text, it says about 46 years it was taken to rebuild it. And they're laughing at Jesus. You're going to build it in 3 days when it took about 516, 46 years to rebuild this temple. But here's the thing, is they weren't understanding that Jesus was talking about his body. They were going to break his body and kill him. They didn't understand, even though they wanted to. This is the straw that started to break the camel's back from John's gospel. This is blasphemy. They wanted to see a sign. If you're the Son of God, prove it. And that's what he says, but they took it literally. And so the disciples took it literally. They didn't understand. They did not understand. But Jesus was talking about his body, and we have the Bible. We know that his body was destroyed. Many scholars say that he was broken so bad that he didn't even look like a regular human being. So that's what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about his body. They had it wrong. So I want to tell you again, change is good. And change is something that we can take from good energy. So don't flip over the table, throw your hands up in the air. Change is good. So I want to go to the 22nd verse. And this is important with the 22nd verse. Is another thing that change can happen. Is we can learn our lessons from our failures. We can learn our lessons from our failures. That is another thing. One, we can make change. Second, we can learn a lesson from the failures. Look what happens here is the disciples. They thought, just like the Jewish people, that he was talking about the temple. No, Jesus was talking about his body. And here is what happens, is they, after he resurrects and he comes to them, they realize what he was talking about. So their failure to know and recognize what Jesus was talking about, to take it literally instead of figuratively and talking about Jesus' body as the temple, they figured it out later. They learned from their mistake that they couldn't understand what Jesus was saying. Most of us wouldn't understand. All of us wouldn't understand it because we have the Bible. That's why we understand it. But they learned from their mistakes. We learn from our mistakes. So there are times where you will want to throw that table over, put your hands in the air like you really don't care, and just say, I'm done. But God has a plan. Sometimes God will even throw a pause in there to you. And again, good energy. Sometimes it takes motivation and energizes you to do things. And through that energy, sometimes God will throw a pause in there, and I'll get to that in a second. But we are broken, just like Jesus was broken. The disciples were broken. Change came because, guess what? Through their anger, think about it, they had to be extremely angry when Jesus died. Through their anger, they had to be in the forefront. Jesus is gone. He ascended to the Father on the 50th day. And Bette Midler would say the wind beneath their wings, that was the Holy Spirit that kept them going. They took the Spirit and proclaimed Jesus. They were in the forefront of proclaiming Jesus' name and God's glory. So they made that change that they are now in the forefront. They learned from their lessons that they didn't understand what Jesus had been saying in the past. And we learn from our lessons, and we are all broken. Some of us may feel broken and pain in our body, and a lot of pain. Some of us may be broken spiritually and just having doubts with God, having problems with your relationship with God. And that happens. Some of us may be going through depression and have been mentally broken. Here's the thing about continuing to go through and to use good energy. Is good energy has you persevere for the race marked out with you. It gives you endurance. Sometimes God will put a pause to have you reconsider and to have you understand things. But we have to persevere. 3 things that I'm going to mention, and I'm going to repeat them a lot. Good anger causes change. Good anger causes for us to learn from our mistakes, and it also gives us the energy to persevere through the race marked out for us, as it says in Hebrews 12:1. Now I want to tell you about a lady who had such anger because she didn't complete something. At first, she had overcome so much. She was a Florida State champion in swimming. Her name is Diana Nyad. Some of you may know her. Diana was a Florida State champion. She overcame, and you never really overcome this, but because it's trauma. But she was abused and is recovering from the abuse of her coach, who sexually abused her. And she decided she was going to do outside of swimming, she was going to do outside swimming. And with that outside swimming, she broke and was in the Guinness World Record book for going around the canal in Manhattan. She also swam from the Bahamas to Florida, which is about 102 miles. Something nobody ever did before. This was another record she broke. She was a famous swimmer at this time. In 28, she took on her biggest feat. She wanted to go through from Cuba to Miami. And what made this hard was the elements of the water, the currents of the water, the storms that were coming through. They had to make sure they got it at the right time. This was going to be upwards of 60 hours in the water at one time. 60 hours. So she tried it at 28. At 28 was her first attempt. She made a shark cage, and the boat had a shark cage where she swam inside where the sharks couldn't get her. It got too bad, the currents got too bad. At 28, she had to stop. She failed. She learned from her mistake. God put a pause. Sometimes when you want to flip the table up, put your hands in the air like you really don't care and say you're done, God will put a pause. And that's exactly what he did with Diana. 60 years later, at 60 years of age, 32 years later, she wanted to try it again. She thought she could learn from her mistake as she failed this major feat. Now, 2 people had done it, but they did it in a shark cage. She wanted to do it solo, without a shark cage, swimming by herself. Now, they did put a team together. On her second attempt, if sharks were to come, they would shock them. And they had kayaks, and they had everything. And they would also her coach was going to feed her at times and things like that, the captain of the ship. But they had to time it just right for her to be able to swim through these dangerous currents. Again, this was much harder than going from Bahamas to Florida because of the currents and the weather. And the first time she went out there at the age of 60. This is her second try. They messed up the timing. The currents were too strong, and she got to a certain spot, and it was just too much. The weather was too much. They had to pull her out. She learned from that. She said, let's go again. Let's leave from Havana, Cuba, and try it again. The third time, she was going well. She was killing it. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, swarms of jellyfish started stinging her so bad they had to pull her out of the water and discontinue swimming. She almost died. She learned from that she had a scientist make a suit for her that she would wear at night on the fourth time. But here, the team was starting to run out of money, and their families were going through a lot. They said, this is the last time we are going to do it. And she was adamant about wanting to go on a particular day. The captain was questioning it. I think we should wait. And she's like, no, I think it's time to go. So they got out there, and she got further. Each time she got further and further. Again, good energy and good anger will give us energy to make change, to persevere, to learn from our mistakes. And each time she did this, she got out further and further. But guess what? They left, and she should have listened to the captain and waited a little bit. A storm came. She got further than she ever did, but they had to pull her out of the water because a major storm came. And the captain of the ship said, I'm done. The coach said, I'm done. They're ready to flip the table over, put their hands up. But she was able to convince them one more time. You're not done until God tells you you're done. So don't flip the table over, put your hands in the air like you really don't care. You are not done. His ways are not your ways. His plans are not your plans. So sometimes you may want to flip the table, but have self-control. They agreed to do it a fifth time. This was going to be the last time because the captain of the ship had terminal cancer. So they timed it just right. They made sure everything was right. And this was going great. She was getting near the Florida line and she started swimming erratically. Her coach had to jump in with her and said, Diana, you are close. But in order for you to make it, you have to start swimming straight. You are swimming off erratically, offline. So she gets out of the water and she starts swimming, but she says before the coach goes back up on the boat, she says, I saw the Taj Mahal and I also saw the yellow brick road. She was hallucinating. She had been in the water for almost 50 hours. So she starts swimming straight. Finally, she gets to the coast. All things are possible with God, as it says in Matthew 24:2. 53 hours she was in the water. She starts walking and can barely walk up, and she had to be taken to the hospital immediately because of exhaustion and dehydration. But she did it. She did it. She learned from her mistakes. She took that good energy and made changes each time. And last, she persevered for the race marked out for her. You are not done until God says you're done. So don't flip the table up and throw your hands in the air and say you're done. Use good energy. Jesus, verse 17, is his disciples didn't know the scriptures. Verse 17 says, zeal of my house will consume me. The disciples knew this was going to cause major problems when Jesus flipped over these tables. That it was going to cause the Jewish people to resent Jesus. And they said, oh no, here it is. But this had to be done. He had to go in his house, fulfill the prophecy, fulfill Psalm 69:9, and fulfill all the prophecies, including 69:9, to flip over the tables as they knew it. But they didn't know his body would be killed and he would resurrect. They did not understand that, and that was part of their failure that they would learn later. But they knew this was going to cause major problems. And it would cause major problems as they would get on Jesus every time they saw him. They wouldn't leave him alone. They would break his back. And so finally, he raised Lazarus up, and they decided they were going to kill him. And they broke every bone in his body just about, and stretched him and pulled him, and he bled. And next thing you know, he died. He died. But on the third day, he resurrected. And that's what he was talking about. He was talking about on the third day, my body, my temple will resurrect. And he rose. And you will be broken. Jesus was broken. You will be broken mentally, physically, and spiritually. You will be broken by Satan will try to break you every day. People will break you and try to put you down and tear you out. God will even break you. As the song, Spirit of Living God. Break me, mold me, melt me, fill me. God will even break you. But people and Satan are going to break you. Last thing I want to mention is Gina Stewart. She's one of the best preachers out there. The National Baptist Convention said if she's speaking, the higher up said if she's speaking, a woman speaks, as one of the head speakers, we're not coming. So some of the top people did not go. They said, we're not coming. They tried to break her from going. Now, she has spoken all over the country, all over different parts of the world. What did she need? She could have flipped the table up, threw her hands in the air, but instead she used good anger. And she persevered through this and went and showed up and started to preach her sermon. And guess what they did? People started walking out. And that was a distraction. Anytime someone walks out, it can be a distraction to the pastor. She kept preaching, kept persevering. Again, good anger can help you to persevere. And that's what she did. She kept preaching. They turned it off on Facebook. No one could see her sermon. They were so upset that